Art Against Mental Illness.
I'm going to talk about books. To do that, I need to talk a bit about Oxfam. I'm guessing that most folks know who Oxfam are. In the UK, they're the most visible of what most Brits call a charity shop. Basically, a reseller of donations of physical things. Usually this is clothing, toys, bric-a-brac, CDs, DVDs, vinyl, and most important to me, books. Oxfam, these days, tends to specialise in the latter and to a slightly lesser extent music and movie stuff. I don't have a whole lot of opinion on the works and deeds of Oxfam, other than they seem to do a thing that the world needs, and a lot of it. I'm more than happy, perhaps keen, to support them. But to me, Oxfam is a shop. And with a few sparse exceptions, for example, comic and cool stuff retailer Forbidden Planet is my favourite retail chain. Oxfam tends to have the best selection of books one can generally not find on the high street. Oxfam is a treasure trove, a bit random for sure, but you can find gems there that you simply won't find anywhere else. For sure, you'll likely be able to track down some of the items on eBay or similar, but you'd have to know what you're looking for. And you wouldn't go to a shop like Oxfam, or any other second-hand bookshop for that matter, because you were looking for something specific. You go precisely because you are not, and that is the joy of such shops. I go to Oxfam to get a book fix, and it doesn't matter which books, I always find something interesting. A cursory glance at my bookshelf, I can easily spot Oxfam purchases. Let's have a look at a few, shall we? Clean and Decent, A Fascinating History of the Bathroom and Water Closet by Lawrence Wright. A hardback originally published in 1960, although this edition is from 1971, 4 years before I was born. It contains a plethora of diagrams, etchings, adverts and illustrations of bogs, baths and shitters from throughout the ages. It's quite exquisite. It cost me a £5. Next, Easy Programming for the Atari Micro by Eric Deason, part of the Shiva's Friendly Micro series, published in 1984. I don't and never have owned an Atari Micro, or in fact any kind of Atari. I was a ZX Spectrum geek back in the day, but a cursory flick through the pages reveals a goldmine of gloriously archaic code snippets, screenshots of pixelated 8-bit graphics, flowcharts and the like. The random page that I just opened it at has the all-caps sentence, "You'll get into an awful mess," mid-paragraph. That says more about the process of art than most actual art books, I think. Finally, Artificial Intelligence by Elaine Rich, published in 1983. A woman publishing an important textbook on what would become an era-defining technology over 40 years later is quite something in itself. She only finished her PhD at Carnegie Mellon 4 years earlier. What a legend. AI forms a big part of my day job, and I've been using AI in some form or another for pushing 2 decades, so clearly this one was going to butter my crumpet. There are some marvellous AI chats in there and plenty of tasty diagrams, and I love a good diagram. Then there was my Star Trek novel binge. At some point, a local Oxfam apparently had a donation of Trek novels from the various pre-21st century eras. I'm talking about Next Generation, Voyager, Deep Space Nine. But me, I love a bit of Star Trek TOS, the glorious original series, Kirk, Spock, Bones, Uhura and the crew. Gaudy colours, 60s fashion and grooviness, dodgy monsters and some of the most intelligent and prescient storylines and faux technology ever. So many of my artistic sensibilities derive from the original Trek. I even did a series of portraits of the original series crew. The shop had a bunch of original Trek novels, so I bought a few, largely based on the covers, which almost all depict Kirk and Spock. There were a couple of covers by fantasy art demigod Boris Vallejo, more on him later, which I had to have. I started reading these slowly, because I read slowly, then I went back to the same branch a few weeks later to discover that there were still quite a few there. Not sure how that could happen, but my win, your loss, so I bought an armful more. Repeat this ritual 1, maybe 2 more times and I have a huge pile of Kirk and Spock adorned books. I just counted, there are currently 20 of the fuckers. I also bought one of the same novel twice. I should probably not go back for a while in the hopes that the rest of them get sold and I can finally kick the habit. So I've spoken a lot about Oxfam, chiefly because they are the main dealer of my preferred non-chemical fix. But there are many other charity and thrift stores and a rich variety of dedicated bookshops, used or otherwise. Choose your poison. It's not the specific shop or chain that matters. What matters is the hunt and the prize. You might assume from this that I own a lot of books, and you would be right, much to the chagrin of my wife, given how much space they take up. She questions how I'm going to get around to reading them all, which I'm obviously not going to, but that's entirely beside the point. I will certainly try and read those Star Trek books, but those are only a small minority of my collection. Yeah, I've got a bunch of novels, but I tend not to hold on to those. I've got a fair number of textbooks, particularly science, maths, computing, some history, various DIY manuals, food, travel, a bunch of books on Zen Buddhism, all the usual stuff. I even have a copy of the Mormon Bible for some reason. But the vast majority of my collection are books that relate in one way or the other to the arts, and they contain lots of pictures. As ever with this podcast, I take a very broad and inclusive interpretation of the term arts. So for me, this category includes comics and graphic novels, books of movies, TV and music, design, typography, fabric, photography and photojournalism, and of course lots on painting, illustration, sculpture, modern art, all that good stuff. Plus a bunch of books on art technique, material, mediums, manuals, history, theory, criticism, the art lifestyle, etc. It's quite an eclectic mix. The vast majority of these books are not meant to be read. Well, not by me anyway. There are 3 reasons that this is the case. 1. My general difficulties with the written word. Listen to my episode titled My Words for more background on my troubled history with the written word. 2. I have a distaste for so-called art speak that borders on the pathological. Listen to my episode entitled Mind Your Language. Maybe I'll reshare that one so you don't have to go digging around. 3. I don't buy them for the words, I buy them for the pictures. Yes, of course I read some of the words. For example, the names of the artworks, the artists, year of creation, medium, size, etc., etc. And some of the books aren't written in art speak and have reasonably easy to read text that says something worthwhile, usually from the artists themselves. But for the most part, I want pictures, and lots of them, and minimal text, or at least text that's easy to ignore. Why do I need lots of books stuffed with pictures of artworks? It's perhaps not as self-evident as it might seem. There's an obvious having nice things aspect. It's not dissimilar to owning artworks or ornaments or action figures or movie posters and the like. It's nice to be surrounded by nice things. But this doesn't mean they sit on the shelves looking cool and making me appear smart and cultured to visitors. There are 2 clear points of evidence to this assertion. 1. As a house of autistics, we don't do visitors, at least not very often. 2. Very few of my books are in spaces that visitors would be permitted to go should they be nuts enough to come and visit. To add to this, so-called coffee table books are no use in my house because our one and only coffee table is always full up with used coffee cups. No, my art books are there for one reason, and one reason alone, because they make me happy. So how do I use my art books? Well, I open them up and leaf through the pages and look at all the lovely pictures. When do I find time to do this in my busy life? Usually when I'm doing something else, like watching the TV or participating in interactions with other humans. To be honest, I have various activities that I do while watching the TV, including making art. I'm never doing one thing at a time. I just can't. I just fidget until I'm no longer doing that thing. So instead, I fidget constructively. Like Sheldon Cooper off The Big Bang Theory, I have my special spot on the sofa. I always have a bunch of books next to that spot. No one else wants my spot anyway. It's shaped like my skinny butt and is not comfortable for any other butt. Butts aside, the pile of books near my nesting spot usually consists entirely of art books. That pile frequently gets very large, much to the disdain of my family. Eventually, their complaining got through to me, so I built a set of shelves that sit arm's reach from my nesting point. This houses whatever books are currently piquing my interest, and they gradually get cycled out with other stuff, old and new. The main body of my book collection lives in my study/office on a bunch of shelves that I built myself. When I feel the need to have a leaf, I scan my shelf for something that takes my fancy or just pull something at random. I like to flick idly through them while the TV is on. Sometimes I'm taking in what I see, savouring it. Sometimes I'm just ambiently enjoying the sensations, the process, the sights, the smells. Books are one of my favourite smells. I love the feel of the stiff, smooth pages as they glide beneath my fingers, the coolness of the paper, the sensation of the pages fanning beneath my fingertips. But these books are not just elaborate fidget toys or relaxation devices. They're jam-packed with inspiration and ideas. I learn from them and use them to stimulate my own creative juices. Why, you audibly wonder, do I not save on space and go digital? Well, although I'm not totally averse to doing so, and I do have a pretty hefty selection of ebooks too, it should be becoming increasingly clear that e-art books just don't cut the qualitative and sensory mustard, or any other type of saucy condiment for that matter. And sensory pleasures aside, many of my books simply aren't digitised and probably never will be. And yes, I can likely find all the images from those books on the internet, but it's just not the same, goddammit. I don't just buy books because there's a picture I like in it. Most of the time it's the opposite. Books provide a kind of curated serendipity. I'll often pick up a book in a shop simply because the cover is cool, or I like the title, or I vaguely remember hearing the artist's name. I'll have a quick flick through to see if it scratches whatever variety of itch I have at that point, check the price, and if it won't deprive me or my family of food for the next week, I'll make the decision as to whether to buy it or not. This decision is usually somewhat tempered by the armful of other books that I've already picked up. Often what follows is some lengthy soul and wallet searching about what I can justifiably afford and what I should probably put back on the shelf. It's always heartbreaking, but a dude's got to have some self-control. I don't just buy second-hand books either, although I still maintain that the most interesting books at any point in time are already out of print. I love new books too, it's just the selection in normal bookshops tends to be limited and thematically constrained by whatever is trendy at any given point in time, which rarely aligns with my current poison. They're also much more expensive and don't smell as nice. Although there is a charm to the new book smell, and they have a very satisfying smoothness, even though that wears away over time. When I say bookshops, I do mean the ones in the real world that have doors and shelves and nerdy humans lurking in dark corners. Yes, Amazon may have every book in print and eBay is a thrift heaven, but the experience is just not in the same realm. Browsing books online is the equivalent of going to the zoo and seeing all the animals on TV screens beamed in from another location. It may be safer and smells less awful, but the low-level threat and sensory assault is precisely the point. Going to a bookshop is like a safari to me, although the biggest threat is that to my wallet. Joyful serendipity is also much harder to experience online. Recommendation algorithms tend to show you similar versions of what you've already seen, or at least something closely adjacent. Sometimes that's what I want, but would Amazon have recommended me a history of toilets? I doubt it. So yes, I'll sometimes hear of a book that I must have and will track it down online, but this is a vanishingly rare occurrence. Owning books, not just art books, but books in general, is not about reading or educating myself or even entertainment, although it is all of those things to a certain degree. But ultimately, like everything else I drone on about here, it's about the whole thing, the whole process, the entire pursuit. People who go fly fishing don't do it because they want to eat fish. They do it for the experience, the challenge, the buzz. It's about the equipment, the technique, the choice of fly, the rod, the line, the location, experiencing the great outdoors. The actual fish are secondary, as it is for me and my books. It's in the thrill of the chase, in hunting, tracking, ensnaring books in their native environment. But unlike the fly fisher who may put their fish back in the water or gobble it for that evening's dinner, my catches bring me joy for years to come. Maybe some of them will get tossed back in for others to catch at some point, but at the moment I'm drowning in them, and that's just fine. So, in celebration of my glorious book collection, for the rest of this episode and some others too, I'm going to present to you some of my favourite art books. I'll tell you a little about them, what they mean to me, and maybe pick out some choice images and maybe even read from them. I'll mainly be focusing on books that relate to painting and illustration since that's my thing, but I'll also stray into other areas of the arts and maybe even some non-arts related books that have some great imagery. I have no idea how many books I'll cover. I'll likely do more than one episode on this, but the chances that they'll come out consecutively is slim to none. They'll come when they come. I'm also putting up no pretense of logical order. This is not Alex's top 10 art books, it's just some books that I have something to say about. I'll put titles and ISBNs in the show notes. If you decide to buy any of these, then please consider doing so from an independent bookseller rather than Amazon or whatever, since they really need your business so that we don't lose them entirely. A great place to do that is bookshop.org. Again, link in show notes. So here goes. My first two books, if you'll excuse the pun, bookend my art buying history by being the first and last, meaning most recent art books that I bought. There is a satisfying symmetry, purely coincidental, between these two books, which are chosen for that exact serendipitous symmetry. I'll explain as I go. Firstly, we have the first book about art that I remember owning. I think it's the first art book I consciously bought, although my memory is usually unreliable. It's certainly the first book that greatly influenced me as an artist, and that book is Fantasy Art Techniques by Boris Vallejo. Partly a showcase for his work and partly an instruction manual, this book mesmerised me as a young teen, and not just for all the nudity. The copy I have in front of me is my original copy. I can't tell you when I acquired it, but it was published in 1985 when I was 9, and given the amount of what amounts to soft porn erotica in it, it seems unlikely that I got it hot off the press. That said, I do remember my mum at some point commenting that she hoped my interest in this book related to the artistic merits of the illustrations herein, rather than their merits for certain other recreational activities enjoyed profusely by teenage boys. No doubt the line was blurry, but I was utterly enamoured by Vallejo's work. Even before I owned a copy, I remember yearning after this book from the pictures I'd seen of it from my parents' book club magazines. Vallejo's work usually depicts Schwarzenegger-style muscle-bound men and lithe, athletic, voluptuous warrior queen women, both depicted in hyper-realism, if with questionably natural physiognomies. These figures are often seen wearing scant items of apparel and wielding swords in confrontational poses before dragons and other mythical beasties. Full or partial nudity is common, and even some naughty bits, as well as the odd lack thereof. See page 22 for an example of this. It's heady, unapologetic stuff that was rocket fuel to a febrile teenage male brain. These days, my opinion on Vallejo's work is a little less prurient and blindly reverent. The detail, finesse and technicality still blows my mind, but for a long time now I've felt his works to be a little static. Given they tended to depict scenes of action and drama, they all feel a little staged and wooden, which, in fact, they largely were, using models and everything. There are examples in the book of reference photos that he used. This is especially apparent when compared to his hero and the daddy of fantasy art, Frank Frazetta. As it turned out, my predilection with regards to genre film, fiction and TV sits more habitually in the sci-fi camp, with a sprinkling of horror and a soupçon of weird in the mix. Not that Boris didn't dabble in those genres. As mentioned above, his delectable illustrations adorn the covers of various of my Star Trek novels, and there's plenty of other sci-fi and a sprinkling of horror in his portfolio, but it's mainly fantasy or fantasy adjacent. It's also worth noting that this book has a foreword by none other than the king of golden era sci-fi, Isaac Asimov, so Vallejo's non-fantasy creds are indeed legit. From a point of view of a budding teenage realist painter, it's hard to think of a better starting point. Some of these images are also iconic. Behold Chevy Chase's hulking bodybuilder form on Vallejo's cover of National Lampoon's Vacation. Others are also genuinely beautiful, and the degree of visual imagination on show here, particularly with the otherworldly beast, is nothing short of staggering. I also really appreciate his sense of setting and the way the backgrounds dissolved into stunning landscapes, evocative of landscape fantasists like John Martin or Claude Lorraine. It's also worth mentioning the technically brilliant and arguably even more erotic works of his wife and fellow fantasy illustrator Julie Bell. I still regularly consult this book, especially if I'm looking for some realist inspiration or just to marvel in its technical brilliance. And that's all, promise. On to the next book, which is about an artist that, in many ways, is the antithesis of Vallejo. The two artists share a penchant for depicting the human form realistically, but in very different ways and to very different ends. I'm talking about British realist painter Jenny Saville, and the book is The Anatomy of Painting. It's authored by various folks, published by the National Gallery in London, and is a visual companion to our exhibition within those hallowed walls in 2025. I wasn't lucky enough to see that exhibition. I picked up the book, new, from Waterstones in Glasgow on a whim a few weeks ago. I've been meaning to pick up a Jenny Saville book for a while, and this one screamed out to me from the featured display. I've been aware of and admired Jenny Saville's work, like many people, since I first came across it on the cover of Welsh indie legends Manic Street Preachers' glorious 1994 masterpiece, The Holy Bible. It was the last piece of quality art that band produced, but far from the last from Saville. That particular piece is called Strategy. It's a giant triptych, roughly 3 metres by 6 metres, depicting, and I quote from the book here, a fat woman wearing only a bra and panties presented from 3 different angles. It's both striking and shocking, but perhaps it shouldn't be either, except perhaps on account of its size. Saville's work is unflinching and knowingly confrontational. She challenges us to confront the human form in all its imperfect glory, and she does it in a way that's impossible to ignore. Saville was influenced by Lucian Freud, Francis Bacon and William de Kooning. To quote her Wikipedia page, she partially credits her interest in big bodies to Pablo Picasso, an artist that she sees as a painter that made his subjects solid and permanent. Like Picasso, her works often treat the human form as an abstraction and a canvas in its own right. Distinct from figure studies time immemorial, we see bodies from harsh, unflattering angles, often only partial, and focused on featureless expanses of tumescent flesh, flat-lighted and pallid. Multiple entangled figures merge into each other, creating corporeal landscapes. Faces seem cadaverous, bruised and blemished. Bra strap marks are visible, scars made salient and central. Sure, you could see Saville's work as a metaphor for modern culture's obsession with so-called bodily perfection, but I think that's to somewhat miss the point. Saville simply wants us to see things as they are. Her works are a celebration, not a cautionary tale. She's telling us to look and see how that makes us feel. By definition, she is not passing judgment, not telling us to juxtapose or pontificate. Her works are an ends to themselves, an enclosed and complete narrative and a canvas on which to paint your own insecurities or celebrate your inherent glorious beauty in whatever form that might take. The book clearly shows a transition from her early works through somewhat more traditional and autobiographical works to a more recent focus on portraiture of sorts, which, in contrast to her earlier quasi-anonymous and chromatically washed works, are a celebration of chaos, character and colour. There is abstraction and energy and deconstruction still, but it seems more comfortable and far less confrontational. I can't help feel a little disappointed by this progression. This might be somewhat surprising since my own work has a lot of parallels to her more recent stylistic leanings, but I like it when art confronts and shocks. If anything, if only in terms of intent, I am moving in the opposite direction, away from colour and character and towards abstraction and atmosphere. So what of the juxtaposition between these two legends of their form? It's perhaps appropriate to compare a quote from each book. Let's start with Senor Vallejo, in his own words. I had been involved in bodybuilding for some years, and fantasy art afforded me the chance to paint muscular men and voluptuous women as unclad as possible. It was the perfect vehicle for me. I'd always loved working with human and animal figures. It gave me an opportunity to do something I enjoyed. To the question of how my work relates or reflects my life, I answer that it carries no deeper significance than this. I love bodies. I want to paint them as beautifully as I can. I am interested in what I can do with a figure, and how well I can do it, and how close to perfection I can come. And by perfection, I don't mean how true to life, but rather how true to a personal mental image or vision. I strive not only to copy life, but also in a sense to enhance it. One can improve on the shape and proportions of a figure and on the fluidity of movement in a painting, but one can also, as an artist, utterly enjoy the figure on its own terms, even if it is imperfect by contemporary standards. Now, here's an excerpt from the Saville book from feminist writer, professor and social commentator Roxane Gay. I must have stood in front of Strategy for at least half an hour as I contemplated the painting and the questions it asked. I was transfixed, because I had never really seen a body like mine displayed without judgment. I quickly came to realise that the only judgment in that space on that day was a judgment I carried. As I've gotten to know Saville's work since, I have been absolutely obsessed with how she paints the fat body. In looking at her work, I am able to set aside what our culture tells me I should think about our fat bodies. Instead, I see an artist's curiosity. I see a frankness and honesty. Women's bodies are rendered lushly, voluptuous breasts and ample bellies and thick thighs. We see hairy triangles between those thick thighs and languorous expressions as women stare into the distance or look down at something we cannot see or look out from the canvas into the beholder. On Saville's canvases, these are the bodies that we live in, as they are, unadorned because no adornment is necessary. What she offers, for those willing to receive, is unabashed abundance. So, while Boris acknowledges the existence of the joy of bodily imperfections, he strives to achieve some ideal or level of perfection. He wants us to be taken out of ourselves, to experience or perhaps be what we are not. Perhaps this is the embodiment of fantasy, although I suspect personal preference and cultural leanings play a huge role in whether you agree with that. Saville, on the other hand, seeks nothing other than to show us who we are, regardless of so-called imperfections, not striving for the best angle, showing us parts of ourselves that we can't or don't wish to see. So in some ways, it's the opposite of fantasy. It's reality in its harshest form. But is it though? Saville shows us that the human body can be used as clay to create quasi-abstract landscapes that resemble nothing we're likely to see in daily life. Her representations are often horrific and grotesque. Her stylistic flourishes give us something extra to reality. There may not be dragons and sorcerers, but there is drama, conflict, and no shortage of warrior queens, if of a very different ilk, bearing all. By comparing these two books, I don't seek to establish which is better or more worthy. Both artists have had immeasurable influence on myself, and the former book definitely means more to me, even if the artist himself is less important to me of late. Saville and Vallejo exist in different realms, so direct comparison is much like comparing apples and steak. and therefore highlighting their similarities and approaches to subject is far more illuminating and leads us to insights about art, culture and humanity that we cannot attain from comparing artists that are more artistically aligned. I really enjoyed this little exercise in bibliographic juxtaposition. Even as I try and wrap this up, I'm thinking of other lines of comparison, interrogation and insight. I could write thousands more words on what the existence of these two brilliant painters tells us about culture and humanity, but I'm not gonna, since I'm neither an art critic nor a scholar, and therefore most of it would be bollocks. I will definitely be writing more about my lovely books though. They're great, aren't they?
Art Against Mental Illness.